Hello and welcome to this instructional video. Today we will be learning about active and passive voice. Scuba the cat will be helping us out today. Later on, we will see some actions from her and form active and passive sentences. Now let's take a look at active voice. Here we can see the subject comes before the object. It's a direct action. An active voice is most preferred in most forms of writing. An example we can look at is Sam fixed the car. Here, Sam, the subject, comes first, car, the object, comes after, and it's a direct relationship. When we look at passive voice, it's the opposite. Here, the object comes before the subject. We see an indirect action, and it can be less concise than active voice. Let's look at an example. The car was fixed by Sam. In this example, Sam is the subject, and it comes after the object of car. We also see here an indirect relationship between the object and the subject. Now let's see some actions and practice. As mentioned earlier, Scuba is going to be helping us out today. We will see 5 different actions from her, and after seeing those actions, we will practice forming the active and passives of what she is doing in English. What is happening in active and passive voice? Let's practice describing what she was doing in active and passive voice. Let's start with active. In an active sentence, we could say that Scuba eats her food. Scuba, the subject, here comes first, and there's a direct relationship. Now let's form the passive. The food is eaten by Scuba. So here the food, the object, comes first, the subject Scuba comes last, and then there is an indirect relationship. Now let's practice forming the active and passive sentences for this action. For the active sentence, we can say Scuba drinks water. Here, Scuba, the subject, again comes first, and we see a direct relationship. Now let's form the passive. The water is drunk by Scuba. Here we see the water, the object, comes first. The subject, Scuba, comes last and after the object, and we have an indirect relationship between the subject and object. Let's practice forming the active and passive voice for this new action. To form the active, we can say Scuba plays with the toy. Here, Scuba, our subject, comes first, the object, the toy, comes after, and we see a direct relationship between the subject and object. When we form the passive, the toy is played by Scuba, the object, the toy, comes first, Scuba, the subject, comes last, and here we see an indirect relationship between the object, the toy, and the subject, Scuba. Let's think about what was happening in this video in active and passive voice. In the active, Scuba sniffs the plant. Scuba, the subject, comes first. The plant, the object, comes after the subject. And we see a direct relationship between the subject, Scuba, and the object, the plant. When we look at the passive, the plant is sniffed by Scuba. We see the object moved up to the front, the plant, and is now followed by the subject, Scuba. We also see an indirect relationship between the object and the subject. Let's think about what is happening in active and passive voice in this last and final video. Let's look at the active. Scuba eats the plant. Here, Scuba, the subject, comes first. The plant, the object, comes after the subject. And we see a direct relationship between the subject and the object. Now let's take a look at the passive. The plant is eaten by Scuba. Here the plant moved up as the object, and Scuba, the subject, comes after the object. Here we also see an indirect relationship between object and subject. Now let's review to see what we've learned. Which of the 4 characteristics on the right-hand side have to do with active voice? And which of the characteristics have to deal with passive voice? For active voice, the first one, subject before object, is one characteristic. Remember, our subject Scuba always came first in our active voice sentences. Another characteristic is a direct action or direct relationship. We can also remember that we had a direct relationship between subject and object in our active sentences. For passive voice, we can select the indirect action. That was one characteristic of our passive sentences. An indirect relationship between the subject and the object in an indirect action. We can also select the object before the subject. That was another characteristic that we saw. Our object moved up before the subject of Scuba in our passive voice sentences. Thank you for watching, and we hope you've learned something useful about active and passive voice. Now it's time for a cat nap. See you next time.